So, Impact Wrestling. Now, first of all, apologies that we haven't had a load of content on this week. It has just been the craziest week so far when it comes to YouTube and outside work. But what I did want to do is I did want to talk about some Impact Wrestling today because, of course, it's Impact Rebellion this coming Sunday. It's the big monumental main event. It's title versus title. It's Kenny Omega versus Rich Swann. The AEW World Champion Kenny Omega versus the Impact World Champion Rich Swann. Title versus title. One person is going to be leaving as the AEW World Champion and the Unified Impact World Champion as well. So don't worry, we're going to have you all covered when it comes to that. I will be doing a watch along live Sunday evening as well when it comes to that historic title versus title main event. So it's a very exciting time to be an Impact Wrestling fan, of course, because this working relationship with AEW, this is what it's really been building to. This whole time, it's always been building to this big Kenny Omega Impact World Championship match. Now, if you can scroll your mind back, if you can cast your mind back and go back to really whenever this was December, when this Impact and AEW working relationship first started, one of my predictions as we headed into 2021 was that I felt that Kenny Omega was going to get an Impact World Championship match. First of all, I said I thought he would compete inside of an Impact Wrestling ring. That's happened. Another thing I said is I felt that he would compete for the Impact World Championship. That is happening. And my third thing I said is that I felt that Kenny Omega would become the Impact World Champion at some point this year. And I think we're just days away from that happening. I really do. Now, there's a couple of things I do want to talk about when it comes to Impact Wrestling today before Impact Rebellion on Sunday. Now, one of them regards the AEW President Tony Khan. Now, if you've watched some of the videos that I've done here on the channel talking about this AEW and Impact Wrestling working relationship, you will know that one of my criticisms, one of my critiques about this is that while we have the Kenny Omegas appearing on Impact Wrestling, while you have Tony Khan doing his paid advertisements every week on Impact, one of my big criticisms of this is that we haven't had a lot of Impact promotion on Dynamite. It feels like, yes, we have the crossover of AEW on Impact Wrestling television, but what we don't have is really a lot of you have, yes, the Good Brothers appear on Dynamite. Yes, you have Don Callis appear on Dynamite too. But it feels like that's it, doesn't it? It feels like really that's it. And whilst you have Tony Khan doing these paid advertisements on Impact, you don't have much of an Impact presence on that show. Certainly not enough to really drive home where they're going, what they're going to be doing, what they're going to be promoting for their show Thursday nights on Access TV, all that kind of stuff. We haven't got that. And that was maybe par for the course before the Impact Rebellion pay-per-view, because you would say, well, maybe that's just the nature of the working relationship. But when you have this Impact Rebellion pay-per-view coming up and the main event, theoretically, now I don't think this is going to happen, but theoretically, you could see an outcome at Impact Rebellion where we have a new AEW World Champion, that being Rich Swann. That would be a big deal, wouldn't it? That would be a big deal to All Elite Wrestling. At least it should be a big deal to All Elite Wrestling. And yet, for whatever reason, they just really haven't promoted it on AEW Dynamite. Now, my issue with that is I think it takes away a lot of realism of it, because I think it gives you the finish already. The finish is that Kenny Omega will be leaving Impact Rebellion as the AEW World Champion and the Unified Impact World Champion. Why do I think that? Well, I felt like that the whole time because I think that's the most likely outcome. But also, as I mentioned, there has just been no promotion. There's just been no promotion on Dynamite on the AEW side of things, which says to me that if there is no promotion on the AEW side of things, then they already know the outcome. The outcome's already been set in stone, because if there was a legitimate threat that Rich Swann could become the AEW World Champion, he would have at least made a few appearances on Dynamite, and that just hasn't happened. So that's been a critique that I've had when I've been talking about this upcoming title versus title main event, this historic title versus title main event. But Tony Khan has addressed this criticism, not to me directly, but on Busted Open radio show. Now, as I mentioned, the pro wrestling landscape has undergone a huge change recently when AEW and Impact Wrestling started a working relationship together, as fans get to see stars from both companies work together, most notably the Good Brothers appearing every single week on AEW Dynamite. However, no one else from Impact has appeared on AEW Dynamite as of yet, as I mentioned. Now, Impact World Champion Rich Swann is set to defend his title against AEW World Champion Kenny Omega at Impact Wrestling's Rebellion pay-per-view this coming Sunday. However, Rich Swann, as I mentioned, has barely been mentioned on AEW Dynamite, and a majority of the AEW audience doesn't even know who he is, or the fact that there's an Impact Rebellion pay-per-view going on Sunday where we could see a new AEW World Champion. Now, AEW President Tony Khan, as I mentioned, he appeared on the Busted Open radio show, and he addressed the reason why the Rebellion Rebellion event has not been promoted much on AEW Dynamite. Now, he ultimately put the blame on Impact Wrestling, stating it's their responsibility to promote the event. So he's appearing in character when he's saying this, because that's what you do. That's what you do. If you're in a situation, if you're in a media situation, this is what you can do. This is the beauty of pro wrestling, is that you can just revert into kayfabe whenever you please, and you can get away with stuff. And that's kind of what he's done here, because it's a valid criticism, and it's a valid criticism that actually makes a lot of sense. Why is the AEW World Championship match not been promoted on AEW Dynamite? You think it would. Well, this is what Tony Khan had to say. Staying in character, he said, quote, Kenny will be challenging for the Impact title this weekend. People have asked me why I haven't gone out and spent a lot of time or money promoting Rebellion. It's when I've gone to you guys' show to promote my cards, I've had to pay and buy ads. It's kind of on Impact. But here's a little free and ad from me. Kenny Omega is coming up this weekend to Impact Wrestling. He's going to be wrestling for the world title. It's possible Rich Swann could be the AEW World Champion next week. It's also quite possible Kenny Omega will be the Impact Champion, the AAA Champion, and of course the AEW World Champion. But we shall see next week. Now, again, he addresses it there. He really doesn't say as to why they haven't really been promoting it. I think the real reason why they haven't been promoting it is because, not that they don't care, but the outcome's obvious. And I think it's obviously just not a priority. That's the thing there, isn't it? Obviously just isn't a priority for Tony Khan and for AEW that this match is going to be happening. Now, obviously, it's an Impact Wrestling pay-per-view. And being an Impact Wrestling pay-per-view, does it make a ton of sense for AEW to promote that, given that they're not really going to be getting any money from it? All of that revenue is going to Impact Wrestling. That is certainly a way to look into it. That's certainly a reason, a rationale. You could say, well, why would they be wanting to put money in Impact Wrestling's pocket? Of course, the counter argument to that is, well, you've got your world champion on the show, and this is the way I would look at it. You've got your world champion Kenny Omega, arguably one of your biggest stars in Kenny Omega, arguably one of the best wrestlers in the world, Kenny Omega. It should be in your best interest as AEW, as the president of AEW for Tony Khan, it should be within your best interest that your world champion not only headlines a massive card for Impact Wrestling, but also a very successful card for Impact Wrestling. If you have Impact Rebellion this Sunday and it barely breaks any Twitter trends worldwide, no one really talks about it, it doesn't do a good buy rate, whatever, that doesn't reflect well, obviously, on Impact Wrestling, but it also doesn't reflect well on AEW. It doesn't. Because they'll be saying, well, Kenny Omega, your world champion, he's not even a draw. He's not even a draw for Impact Wrestling. Why would we be a draw for AEW? Now, we know that's not true, but what we do know is that there is a lot of division on social media. Even now that NXT and AEW are on different nights, there's still a lot of tribalism when it comes to, are you a WWE person or are you an AEW person? You have to pick one or the two. And I know there's people that don't like AEW. There's people that do like to criticize Tony Khan and Kenny Omega and Cody Rhodes and all that kind of stuff. They will have a field day if the AEW World Champion goes to Impact and doesn't do very well. They'll go, some draw that Kenny Omega is. You know what I mean? So it should be, in my opinion, it's in Tony Khan and it's in AEW's best interest that this is a venture that succeeds at the weekend. And obviously it's in the best interest for Impact Wrestling because it's their pay-per-view. As I mentioned, it's just a criticism for me because I think it takes away any form of reality from it. If AEW Dynamite isn't promoting it, it's because there's no real stakes. There's no real drama there. There's no real, what could happen? It gives you the impression that AEW aren't promoting it because they know what's going to happen. They know that Kenny Omega is going to win. If there was any real threat, they would have hyped it up on AEW Dynamite as, well, you never know, this time next week we could have an AEW World Champion. At least try and educate the fans, or at least try and put the element of doubt inside the fans' head that something big could happen. And if I was an Impact Wrestling executive, I was an Impact Wrestling wrestler, official, you name it, you would have thought, at the very least, they'd have spoken to Tony Khan or some official inside AEW and said, you know what, can we at least do a segment? If they could have done one segment this week on Dynamite or whatever, and I know, trust me, I know that AEW Dynamite is very prime real estate on TNT when it comes to AEW. They've got a plethora of talent under contract on their roster. They've got a plethora of shows, 2 of which are on YouTube, and it's difficult to get all of their own talent on an AEW broadcast on TNT, let alone an Impact Wrestling talent to hype up an Impact Wrestling pay-per-view. But look, as part of the working relationship, you get the Good Brothers, we get the Good Brothers, you get Kenny Omega, but also if we're going to make this working relationship work, there's got to be a bit of tit for tat here. And I would have had a conversation, or at least would have hoped to have had a conversation with him and said, look, can we do something? Can we at least do a segment? Can Kenny Omega have a match on Dynamite on Wednesday and then Rich Swann come out? And I don't know. They don't tend to like to do disqualifications and stuff like that. But can we have a situation where Rich Swann confronts him? Something. They could have done something. Or Rich Swann hijacks the show and says, Tony Khan likes to do all of these paid advertisements. I'm going to do one of my own to hype up Impact Rebellion on Sunday night, whereby I will become the new AEW World Champion. Then you'll see a lot more of this on AEW television. They could have done something like that, but they didn't. And I think that's the most disappointing thing for me. So I know Tony Khan has addressed it, but I felt he could have addressed it a bit better. Now, I do want to talk about something else before we wrap it up here. And another thing I did want to talk about is something that we touched on. Gosh, it might be like a year ago. It might be around a year ago when we spoke about Impact Wrestling bringing back the TNA concept. Now, around April last year, we were going to have an event of WrestleMania 36 weekend before the pandemic. We were going to have an event called TNA There's No Place Like Home. It was going to take place in Nashville, and it's going to be very TNA-centric. We were going to have a King of the Mountain ladder match for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. That's where Moose was originally going to become the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. We were going to have the Motor City Machine Guns reunite at that event. Obviously, we know they returned later on in the year at Slammiversary. Anyway, we were going to have the Aces and Eights return. I don't know which version and which members of the Aces and Eights. There were rumors about D'Lo Brown and Mr. Anderson, Ken Anderson. But we were going to have a very TNA-centric show. Now, of course, because of the pandemic, it never happened. But we still could be looking at a scenario where the TNA brand does return to Impact Wrestling. Now, the TNA brand could return and become a new platform to host action for the Knockouts division. Now, Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Scott D'Amore recently appeared on TMFI Wrestling Show, and he talked about the possibility of the TNA brand returning. He said it's a real possibility. He said, quote, as we come out of this pandemic environment and get back out there, certainly that's a possibility. It's a possibility that the TNA brand could return. I think it's one of the things many, and certainly not at the top of the list, but one of the things that the pandemic has robbed us of is that there's an opportunity to see the return of TNA. We have so many unbelievable knockouts. Maybe we'll end up continuing to grow the knockouts division and give them their own separate platform. Now, first of all, I'm a big TNA fan. I was a fan of TNA back in the day. Well, especially on its days, obviously in Spike TV and the peaks of the main event mafia, Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Sting, all of those great names, Christopher Daniels. Really, you could say maybe the peak of Impact Wrestling's history. This is prior to Hogan and Bischoff. Not that I'm doing any disrespect to them, but I was just a fan of that. Not I don't say original TNA, but that around TNA that period, I was a big fan of. Would I like to see that version of it return? Yes. I don't know if it necessarily can, considering that the stars that were involved in that period of time. It's one thing to bring the branding of TNA back. It's another thing to bring what made TNA back. And those names are AJ Styles. Obviously, I know Samoa Joe's just been released, so maybe it's a possibility, but Christopher Daniels, and if you want to talk about knockouts, Gail Kim, Awesome Kong. And again, I know people are going to criticize the legends and the overabundance that they brought in throughout Impact Wrestling's history, which is true, but they were instrumental in TNA Wrestling at the time, whether that is Kurt Angle, whether that's Sting, whether that's Kevin Nash, Booker T, Scott Steiner. Unless you bring those names in, it doesn't feel very TNA to me. And I know you can go scale it way back and bring in names like the Amazing Red, which I'd love to see return. I'm not against a TNA Nostalgia show, against a TNA branding show. I think a bit like the old ECW reunion shows that WWE did, it's all about who you bring in and the cast that you create around it. Now, in terms of bringing it back to be a regular show, I would be really, really hesitant about bringing it back, not bringing it back to be a regular show. I would be very hesitant about bringing it back for a knockout show. Obviously, one of the biggest problems with TNA during the mid-2000s was the name. It's the reason it's called Impact Wrestling today is because the TNA name was not a good name. It has another meaning. I'm not going to say it here because I don't want to get demonetized, but if you type it into Google, you'll probably find out. Make sure you're over 18 when you do so, but that was the problem, and it was a Vince Russoism. He wanted to name it that because of its other connotations. People, when you said TNA to people didn't think total non-stop action. They thought something else. And that was part of the problem for that name. That's why, as I mentioned, that's why eventually it was changed back. It was renamed into Impact Wrestling because it's just better. It's more corporate friendly. Advertisers prefer it. Networks prefer it. It just works better. I would be really hesitant in creating a program about female wrestling that's called TNA. I think the women's evolution in pro wrestling and in society have come so far over the course of the last few years that to me it just seems like a massive step backwards into the late 1990s, into the early 2000s to be branding women's wrestling as TNA, right? That just doesn't seem corporate friendly. Now, I'm not against having a knockout show. If anything, I think that'd be fantastic. I think the Knockouts division, as I mentioned, is arguably, I think WWE does have the strongest women's division in the world right now. But I think if you're going to look at other strong women's divisions in North America, Impact Wrestling's right up there because they're so good at booking female talent, giving female talent an opportunity to succeed. So if they could create a whole program around that, absolutely. And look, the company that owns Impact Wrestling owns Access TV as well. That's Anthem. They can do whatever they want in terms of programming. So why not? Just don't brand it TNA. Now, when it comes to TNA, and we'll wrap up in a second, when it comes to TNA, I did pitch an idea last year, and I still want to pitch it again because I still think it'd be a good idea, probably just because it's my idea. But I said, look, if you're going to commit to, say, Impact Wrestling, they have 2 hours per week on Access TV. Well, why don't you cut that in half? Why don't you say on Thursday nights, and now this doesn't really work that wrestling's on every single night, but my pitch that I had last year was when Impact was on Tuesdays, cut that 2 hours in half. So that on Tuesday you have 1 hour, which is Impact Wrestling on Access TV, the more modern version. And then on the Thursday, you have TNA Wrestling on Access TV, and you rebrand it as the old TNA. You bring back the six-sided ring. You almost have a completely different broadcast than you have to Impact Wrestling, and just see what that would look like. And again, I don't know how necessarily that would look like in terms of the roster and all that kind of stuff. Could TNA do a brand, Impact Wrestling do a brand split? Would it really be, is it worth doing a brand split? WWE can barely do one. Who's to say Impact could do one? I don't know. But if they wanted to bring back TNA, maybe that's a way to look at it. Now, as I mentioned, this was prior to the time that wrestling was on every single night, so I don't know how that would work now. But certainly is very interesting, all of those things. So let me know what you think. Get involved in the discussion below. I'll be sure to read and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, Impact Wrestling, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. As I mentioned, we'll be doing a lot more Impact Rebellion stuff as the weekend rolls on, so be sure to subscribe. Bottom right hand corner, click the notification bell, you'll be notified when we post our daily videos or when we go live on Sunday night for the Impact Rebellion watch along. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.